The clock above the classroom door ticked louder than usual that day. Fourth period at Oak Ridge High was always sluggish, but this Thursday dragged like honey dripping from a spoon. Outside, the Indiana sky hung low and gray, the kind of afternoon that made even the fluorescent lights hum with boredom. The air smelled of dry erase markers, the sharp tang of citrus cleaner, and the faint musk of backpacks stuffed with forgotten gym clothes. At the front of the room, Mr. Carter, calculus teacher, debate coach, and self-appointed keeper of teenage accountability, scrawled a chain rule problem across the whiteboard. His handwriting was neat but impatient, the marker squeaking under his grip. He wasn't cruel, but he wasn't warm either. Sarcasm was his love language, and today his audience of half-awake juniors wasn't playing along. Anyone? Or do I need to call the National Math Society for backup? He deadpanned, scanning the room. A few students snorted, but most just blinked at the equation like it was hieroglyphics. In the back row, Jessica Kim doodled parabolas in her margins. Near the window, Elijah Rodriguez discreetly checked his phone under the desk. The clock ticked. The radiator hissed. Another day in the trenches. Then a sound broke the monotony. A slow, rhythmic squeak from the hallway. The janitor, Henry Dawson, pushed his mop past the doorframe. He moved like he always did. Steady, silent, a man who'd long mastered the art of being invisible. His uniform, faded green, with H. Dawson stitched crookedly over the pocket, was spotless, same as the floors he kept that way. Students rarely noticed him, teachers even less. He was part of the scenery, like the fire extinguishers or the trophy case no one dusted. But today, Mr. Carter's gaze lingered. Maybe it was the way Henry paused to study the board, just for a second. Maybe it was the restless itch of a teacher whose joke hadn't landed. Whatever the reason, Carter smirked and pointed at the doorway. "Well, look who's here. Henry, you think you can solve this one?" He tapped the equation with his marker, grinning like he'd just unveiled a prize on a game show. The class tittered, not mean, but uneasy. Laughter that prickled the neck. Henry froze. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the drip of his mop onto the tiles. Then, without a word, he stepped inside. The room stiffened. Jessica's pencil hovered mid-doodle. Elijah's phone slipped into his lap. No one had ever seen Henry Dawson do anything but sweep. He set the mop against the wall with deliberate care, then approached the board. "You mind?" he asked, voice low and rough like he hadn't used it in years. Carter's eyebrows shot up, but he waved a hand. "Be my guest." Henry picked up the marker, studied the problem, and then he began to write. Not hesitantly, not like someone guessing. His strokes were sure, methodical, each line a thread in a tapestry only he could see. The class leaned forward as one. Even Carter's smirk faded. The marker didn't squeak now. It glided, weaving numbers into sense. Halfway through, Henry spoke, not to the room, but to the logic itself. "See, the trick's spotting the inner function first. Isolate that and the rest unfolds clean." His voice wasn't teacherly or smug. It was the tone of someone who'd done this 1,000 times in another life. When he finished, he capped the marker and stepped back. The board was a masterpiece of clarity. No crossed-out errors, no frantic erasures. Just a perfect solution, laid bare. For a full 10 seconds, no one moved. Then from the back, someone whispered, "Holy crap, he got it right." Henry didn't smile, didn't shrug, just nodded once and walked out, picking up his mop like nothing had happened. But the room crackled with the aftershock. Carter's jaw worked silently. Jessica's doodles were forgotten. And Elijah? Elijah was already filming, his thumb hovering over send. Because Henry Dawson hadn't just solved an equation. He'd cracked open the world. By the time the final bell rang, the video was already spreading. Elijah's shaky footage, capturing Henry's hands moving across the board like a composer conducting an invisible symphony, had leapt from phone to phone, screen to screen. The caption read, "When your janitor outmaths your math teacher." In the hallway, clusters of students huddled around devices, replaying the moment. Whispers tangled with laughter. "Did you see Mr. Carter's face? Since when does Henry know calculus? Dude, he explained it better than the textbook." Henry, meanwhile, kept to his routine. He emptied trash bins, wiped down lockers, and buffed scuff marks off the linoleum, same as every afternoon. But now, eyes followed him. A freshman, clutching a geometry textbook, hesitated by the supply closet. Mr. Dawson, can you help me with this problem?" Henry paused, then nodded. He didn't sit at a desk. He knelt beside her on the floor, pointing at her notebook with a calloused finger. "You're close. Just forgot to carry the negative here." The girl's face lit up. "Oh, so if I flip this side, then the rest falls into place," he finished. Word traveled faster than a hallway rumor. By the next morning, a dozen kids lingered near the janitor's closet, worksheets in hand. Even the chess club president, a senior who'd never spoken to Henry, slid a crumpled AP calculus test toward him. "I'm failing," he admitted. Henry studied the red-inked paper. "Not anymore," he said. But not everyone was thrilled. In the teacher's lounge, Mr. Carter stabbed at his salad like it owed him money. "It's a fluke," he muttered to the physics teacher. Guy probably Googled it. Across the room, the English teacher, Ms. Green, scrolled through the now viral video on her phone. "Funny," she mused. "He explains it clearer than our $2,000 online curriculum." Carter's fork clattered against his tray. The principal, Dr. Ellis, watched it all unfold from her office window. She'd known Henry for 6 years, quiet, reliable, the kind of man who fixed leaky faucets before anyone reported them. Now, as she watched him kneel beside a sobbing sophomore, patiently reworking a failed quiz, she reached for her phone. "Board meeting tonight," she texted her assistant. "Add an agenda item, unexpected resources." Meanwhile, Henry's past began to surface. A substitute teacher recognized him. "Wait, isn't that the guy who used to tutor at Purdue?" A custodian from his old job in Gary chimed in. "Yeah, heard he was some kind of genius before life kicked him sideways." The whispers grew legs, sprinting through the school like a brush fire. By week's end, Henry's world had tilted. Students left notes in his mop bucket. "Thank you," scribbled on napkins, starbursts taped to trig worksheets. The basketball team even started calling him Professor D. But beneath the gratitude lurked something heavier, the weight of eyes expecting magic. And in the shadows, Carter's silence grew teeth. Then came the email. Dr. Ellis's official request, "Mr. Dawson, would you consider leading an after-school tutoring program? Paid, of course." Henry read it twice in the dim glow of the janitor's closet. The cursor blinked. Somewhere down the hall, a locker slammed. He typed a single word, "Okay." But as he mopped the empty cafeteria that night, the mop's squeak echoed like a question. Could he really step back into the light after all these years? And what happened when the world stopped clapping? Outside, the first snow of December began to fall, soft, silent, and relentless. The invitation sat heavy in Henry's pocket all week, a crisp envelope from Doctor. Ellis, formalizing the tutoring program. He'd nod when colleagues congratulated him, but his hands kept finding their way back to work, scrubbing graffiti from bathroom stalls, untangling jump ropes for PE class, anything to keep moving. Because stillness meant remembering, and Henry Dawson had spent 20 years learning how to forget. Then, on a frozen Tuesday night, it caught up with him. He was sorting broken pencils from the Math Wing's donation bin when a flash of gold caught his eye. A Purdue University emblem on a tattered notebook. The sight punched through him like a slipped knife. Suddenly, he wasn't in Oak Ridge High's fluorescent-lit hallway anymore. He was 18 again, standing on the sun-drenched campus of Purdue, his mother's hands squeezing his shoulders so tight it almost hurt. "You remember what I told you?" Estelle Dawson had whispered, her voice thick with the accent she'd carried from Jamaica to Gary, Indiana. Books first, always. She'd pressed her forehead to his, her nurse's uniform still smelling of antiseptic from her night shift. "The world will try to shut its doors on you, boy, but if you bring your own key—" She'd tapped his temple. "They can't stop you." Henry blinked. The hallway snapped back into focus, but the memory clung like cobwebs. That night, for the first time in decades, he dug under his bed for the cardboard box, the one that smelled of mothballs and regret. Inside lay relics of a life that no longer fit him. A Purdue ID with his baby-faced grin, differential equations notes in his tight, precise handwriting, a photo of him and Estelle at family weekend, her arms thrown around him in front of the engineering building, and beneath it all, the letter. The oncologist's stationery was yellowed now, but the words still screamed, "Stage 4, 6 months with treatment." He'd received it sophomore year, halfway through his thermodynamics midterm. By sunset, he'd been on a Greyhound back to Gary, his scholarship forms fluttering unfinished in the dorm trash. The memories came faster now, unstoppable. His mother, wasting away in that Medicaid bed but still quizzing him on calculus problems to keep his mind sharp. The university's perfunctory emails. "Your leave of absence expires next semester, Mr. Dawson." The funeral, where no professors came, just neighbors from their apartment complex and Alana, his baby sister, sobbing into his only suit. The job applications. So many applications. Education level, the forms always asked. He'd write some college, then scratch it out for high school diploma. A car horn blared outside his apartment, jerking him back to the present. The photo trembled in his hands. Estelle's smile, wide, unguarded, so sure he'd change the world, burned worse than any equation he'd ever solved. But the next morning, Miss Green intercepted him at the faculty coffee machine. "So," she said, filling the silence as he doctored his bitter brew with 3 sugars, "Purdue, huh?" Henry's spoon stilled. "Who told you?" "Small-town internet," she shrugged. "Also, you're literally wearing a Boilermaker's lanyard." He glanced down. He'd absent-mindedly grabbed it from the box that morning. She leaned in. "Why'd you leave?" The question hung between them. Through the window, students laughed on the quad, their backpacks bouncing. Henry watched a girl with Estelle's nose freckles struggle with a locker combination. "Life got in the way," he said finally. But Miss Green, who'd once abandoned a PhD to care for her autistic brother, just nodded. "It always does." She slid a flyer toward him. "Oak Ridge Tutoring Initiative, Head Instructor, H. Dawson." "For what it's worth," she added, "the kids aren't the only ones learning something new." When she left, Henry stared at the flyer. His name looked foreign in bold print, like someone else's life. But beneath the fear, something else stirred, the ghost of that boy who'd once aced finals with his mother's voice in his head. Books first, always. That afternoon, as he mopped the chem lab, a voice piped up behind him. "Mr. D, I brought friends." Henry turned. Elijah stood with 6 classmates, their backpacks overflowing with crumpled homework. The chess club president held out a bag of Doritos like a peace offering. "We heard you're starting a thing?" For a heartbeat, Henry hesitated. Then, with a quiet exhale, he propped his mop against the wall. "Grab chairs," he said. "And somebody open a window. It reeks like ammonia in here." As the students scrambled, Henry uncapped a dry erase marker. The squeak echoed like a key turning in a long, rusted lock. The tutoring sessions became the worst-kept secret at Oak Ridge High. What started as a handful of students in the chem lab soon spilled into the library, then the cafeteria, until Henry was holding court 3 afternoons a week for nearly 30 kids. The school secretary started calling it Dawson's Dojo, a place where C students suddenly grasped quadratic formulas, and where Jessica Kim, who'd once hidden during math class, now worked problems on the board with shaky but determined hands. But not everyone was celebrating. The first shot came via email, an anonymous complaint to the school board. Why is an uncertified custodian teaching advanced math? Where are the background checks? Dr. Ellis read it aloud in the next faculty meeting, her voice clipped. "I'll handle this," she said, but the damage was done. Whispers slithered through the PTA. "He's not even a real teacher." What's next? The lunch lady running biology labs. Mr. Carter, meanwhile, perfected the art of the backhanded compliment. "Impressive how he's got them memorizing shortcuts," he'd say in the lounge, stirring his coffee just a little too vigorously. "Shame they won't learn proper theory." The other teachers would glance at each other, but no one contradicted him, not out loud. Then came the morning. Henry arrived to find his makeshift classroom locked. "Maintenance issue," said the custodian log, though the door opened fine when Dr. Ellis stormed down with her master key. That same afternoon, the AP calculus textbooks Henry had borrowed from the storage closet vanished. "Inventory audit," claimed the note left in their place. The kids noticed. "They're scared of you," Elijah muttered as Henry sketched integrals on napkins. "Scared of a janitor?" Henry chuckled, but the word tasted bitter. He'd been called worse, but this stung differently. The breaking point came during parent-teacher conferences. Henry, mopping the hallways as usual, overheard Mrs. Rodriguez, Elijah's mother, confront Carter. "Why won't you recommend my son for mathletes? He's improved since working with Mr. Dawson." Carter's reply dripped with faux concern. "Tutoring's one thing, but competition requires discipline training. I'd hate for Elijah to embarrass himself." Henry's mop handle cracked against the tiles. Both adults turned. For a heartbeat, the hallway hummed with tension. Then Mrs. Rodriguez squared her shoulders. "Funny," she said, loud enough for the waiting parents to hear. "Elijah says Mr. Dawson explains things so even I could understand them. Maybe you should sit in sometime." Carter's neck flushed scarlet. That night, Henry found a typed note in his locker. "Know your place." The next day, the school board called an emergency meeting. Rumors flew. They were shutting down the tutoring, firing Henry, even canceling the math department's budget. Students organized a walkout. "Dawson or nothing," read the hastily painted posters. Reporters circled the parking lot. Through it all, Henry kept cleaning, his hands steady, even as his chest ached. This was why he'd stayed invisible for so long. The moment you stood up, the world shoved you back down. Henry's words hung in the air, a quiet truth settling over the room like dust. He didn't need to be polished or perfect. His passion and authenticity were enough. For once, he wasn't speaking to a room full of numbers and formulas, but to people who understood what it meant to inspire, not with credentials, but with connection. As the last echoes of his speech faded, the applause rolled in again, louder this time, more insistent. It wasn't just the recognition of his journey, but the understanding that his story was part of something bigger, a truth about education that wasn't about titles or accolades, but about reaching those who had almost slipped through the cracks. Dr. Wright stood, her smile broad and approving. "Henry Dawson," she said, her voice ringing with warmth, "reminds us that the future of STEM doesn't live in ivory towers, but in the classrooms where the struggle to teach is met with the tenacity to learn. And he's proven that teaching is less about the degree and more about the heart." The crowd was on their feet now, and for the first time in years, Henry felt something stir inside him, a small but steady flame that had been buried for too long. He had started out as a janitor, a forgotten part of the machine, but now he was part of the conversation, a force that couldn't be ignored. Back at Oak Ridge, his students watched the live stream of his keynote address, hanging on every word. The signs they'd made still sat in their classrooms, a reminder of how far they'd all come. When the session ended, Jessica's message flashed across Henry's phone. "You were amazing. We knew you could do it." Elijah had sent a voice memo, his voice thick with pride. "Mr. D, you're the real deal." And for a moment, Henry allowed himself to breathe it in, to feel proud. The return to Oak Ridge wasn't quite the same. The students gathered at the bus stop, their cheers greeting him like a parade. They'd been waiting for this moment, too, waiting for him to return, not just as their tutor, but as someone who had claimed his place among the people who truly mattered. He found Dr. Ellis waiting for him in her office. She'd been busy, no doubt, but there was a look in her eyes that said everything. "You did it, Henry," she said, her voice softer than usual. "I think this was just the beginning." He chuckled, brushing a hand through his hair. "Yeah, but I think the dinosaur tie might have had something to do with it." "Don't get cocky," she warned, but the twinkle in her eyes made it clear that she was proud too. And, as the year went on, the tutoring program flourished. Dawson's dojo became a symbol of the unconventional paths that often led to the most profound transformations. Students in every grade came to him for help, not just with math, but with life. Henry had found something he never thought he'd have again, a purpose that wasn't confined to the janitor's closet. A few months later, a familiar face appeared in the hallway, Carter, who had resigned after the board's decision. He was no longer the same man, his pride chipped away by the truth of Henry's influence. "I hear the dojo's thriving," Carter said, his tone cool but not hostile. "Yeah," Henry replied, wiping his hands on his apron. "Funny how the world works, huh?" Carter nodded, a reluctant respect in his eyes. Maybe you were right about one thing." Henry raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" "Sometimes all it takes is one person to change the whole game." And for the first time, Henry believed it. The past had been full of losses and regrets, but now his future was wide open. The journey from janitor to keynote speaker wasn't one he'd ever imagined for himself, but it was his. And that was more than enough. He walked out into the hall, the familiar sound of students chattering and lockers slamming closing in around him. But it felt different now. He wasn't just a janitor anymore. He was Henry Dawson, the teacher, the mentor, and maybe, just maybe, the hero this small town had needed all along. And as the next class filed into Dawson's dojo, he smiled. He hadn't found the end of his story yet, but he knew for certain now that it was only just beginning. The warmth of the summer afternoon seemed to stretch on as Henry stood in the hallway of Oak Ridge High, the weight of everything that had led him to this point, settling over him, like a heavy but comfortable coat. He looked at the photo of his mother smiling proudly in her worn sweater, her arms around him at his high school graduation. He could still hear her voice, clear and warm, urging him to always keep the books first. And yet, Henry knew now that his journey hadn't just been about books. It was about the doors they opened and the ones he had to build himself. As he added his own words beneath her advice, then doors, something in him shifted, the tension that had been gnawing at him for years finally loosening. The halls of Oak Ridge had been a constant part of his life for so long, both as a student and as the janitor, but now they felt like a chapter closing. Not an end, but a beginning. He slipped the cap back on the marker and stood still for a moment, taking in the familiar smells of old textbooks, cafeteria lunches, and the faint scent of chalk dust. His mind wandered to his students, Jessica, Elijah, the basketball players who had once avoided math like it was a foreign language. They were ready now, ready to leave this place and face the world, and he had given them a key to unlock their futures. More importantly, they had given him one too. Outside, the last of the families were starting to gather for graduation photos, their voices carrying through the open doors. He smiled, his heart full in a way it hadn't been for years. He could leave this school with the quiet knowledge that it had all mattered, the hours of tutoring, the late-night lessons, the laughter in the cafeteria, the mop that had once been his only companion. Every bit of it had been a door opening. As he made his way toward the exit, the sound of footsteps echoed behind him. He turned, expecting to see Dr. Ellis or Ms. Green, but it was Elijah, holding his acceptance letter to Purdue, his expression a mixture of pride and uncertainty. "You okay?" Henry asked, his voice softer than usual. Elijah nodded, though his eyes flickered with something unspoken. "You didn't just teach me math, Mr. D," he said, his voice steady. "You taught me how to take chances, how to trust that doors will open, even if we have to walk through them ourselves." Henry's throat tightened, but he fought back the emotion. "I think you're gonna do great things, Elijah. Just don't forget the ones who helped you along the way." Elijah grinned, the weight of the world already lifting off his shoulders. "I won't. And hey," he added, looking down at the letter in his hand, "I'm going to make sure we do something with Purdue's online resources. For everyone. Just like you said." Henry's heart swelled. The kid had more ambition than he'd known how to put into words at that age. He saw the spark of something in Elijah that could ignite entire classrooms. He was just the kind of student Henry had once been, the kind who had wondered if he was destined to be more than what his circumstances had predicted. "I'll be watching, Elijah. Just don't forget to teach someone else how to unlock doors along the way, yeah?" Elijah nodded earnestly. "I will. I promise." The two of them stood for a moment, side by side, watching the sun dip lower on the horizon, casting long shadows over the football field. It felt like the end of something, yes, but also the beginning of everything that could follow. Henry glanced one last time at the hallway, the classrooms, the lockers, the trophy cases, and turned to leave. As he walked down the corridor, the last light of the day reflected off the shiny floors. His footsteps echoed in the emptiness, not as a janitor, but as someone who had learned over time how to open doors for others. And maybe, just maybe, he was about to walk through one of his own. Outside, he paused on the steps, the fireflies dancing in the warm evening air, their tiny bodies glowing like the flickers of possibilities ahead. He reached for his phone and scrolled through the messages that had been piling up. Texts from students, emails from Purdue, and a note from Dr. Moss confirming that his hybrid program would start in the fall. Henry smiled, his hand resting on the cool metal of the railing. The world had gotten bigger. The doors were opening wider now, and it wasn't just for him, it was for all of them. With a deep breath, he stepped forward, the weight of his past behind him, and his future unfolding with every step. He wasn't just walking into the next chapter. He was carrying the light he had once hidden under a bushel, ready to share it with the world. And somewhere, right there in the soft glow of the fireflies, another door creaked open,